God's chosen one, have you ever quietly asked yourself, why did God hide me? Why did he allow others to be celebrated while you remained in the shadows? Why did it feel like your gifts were overlooked, your voice muted, your progress delayed? You were ready, or at least you thought you were, but the spotlight never came. The truth is, it wasn't rejection, it wasn't failure, it was God's protection. God hid you not because you weren't worthy, but because you were sacred, and sacred things must be shielded before they can be revealed, like Moses in the river, like David in the pasture, like Jesus before his ministry. You weren't being denied, you were being developed, and while others were racing to be seen, heaven was crafting you in silence, because what's birthed in the secret place carries weight in the public place. If this already stirs something deep in your spirit, I invite you to comment 777 right now. That number isn't random. It represents completion, spiritual perfection, and divine timing. It's a sign that the season of hiding is coming to a close, and your release is near. Before we go further, I want to pause and thank everyone who has supported this channel through Super Thanks. Your kindness, your generosity, and your belief in this message have been a blessing not just to us, but to every heart that finds healing here. Whether you've donated or simply shown up to listen, know that your presence matters, and you are deeply appreciated. But now, I need you to lean in, because what if I told you that everything you thought was holding you back was actually heaven pulling you forward in disguise? What if the delay was never a delay at all, but divine incubation? What if the silence wasn't a punishment, but preparation for a voice the world cannot ignore? The season of hiding is ending, and what comes next will reveal why God had to cover you, and why the unveiling begins now. Let's go deeper. God's chosen ones. This is why God hid you, and why it's over now. Not all treasures are lost. Some are buried on purpose, not discarded but destined for depth. Could it be that your season of silence wasn't a mistake, but divine design? You, God's chosen one, were not overlooked. You were hidden for a reason far greater than you imagined. Not because you were unworthy, but because you were being formed. Doesn't the potter first hide the clay on his wheel before the world sees the final shape? There's something sacred about being concealed. Scripture whispers this mystery in Isaiah 49:2. He made me into a polished arrow and concealed me in his quiver. Why would God hide what he has prepared? Because what carries great power must be sharpened in secret. And what God has placed inside you isn't light. It's weighty. It isn't common. It's consecrated. Have you ever wondered why your light seemed dimmed while others basked in recognition? Why your voice was hushed while others shouted from platforms? It wasn't punishment. It was protection. The same way God shielded Moses in the desert, far from Pharaoh's palace. The same way he kept Joseph in a prison, even though a palace was promised. These weren't delays, they were sanctuaries. Could it be that your delay was your deliverance? I once heard of a man named Elijah, not the prophet, a street painter from Brazil who sold his art for coins at a crowded metro station. For 10 years, no one knew his name. But during those quiet days, he painted the same sunrise over and over. He said it reminded him of God's promises. One day, a foreign collector noticed. Today, his work hangs in museums across continents. But the real masterpiece wasn't the canvas. It was the character forged in his hidden years. The Bible says in Ecclesiastes 3:1, "To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven." Have you been trying to bloom in a season meant for root growth? What if your invisibility was actually your invitation into intimacy with God? Before the reveal always comes the retreat. Even Jesus, before stepping into his ministry, withdrew into the wilderness, alone, tempted, tested. Why? Because visibility without preparation can crush what wasn't yet ready. Can a tree flourish if its roots haven't sunk deep? Think of the caterpillar, silent in its cocoon, wrapped in stillness. Who would believe it carries wings? But God does, and that's all that ever mattered. He saw the wings in you before you saw them yourself. Can you feel the shell starting to tremble? You were never forgotten. You were reserved, like a hidden scroll sealed for a later time, like David, who was anointed king but sent back to the field. That anointing didn't vanish. It matured in the soil of obscurity. Michelangelo once said, "I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set him free." Perhaps that's what God has been doing with you all along, chiseling through fear, doubt, rejection, and silence, until only purpose remains. And now the soil is shifting, the seal is breaking, the time of hiding is coming to an end. What heaven concealed, earth is about to witness. You weren't buried to die, you were buried to rise. That's the part no one ever sees, isn't it? The quiet seasons, the hidden years, the moments when your faith still showed up, but the world didn't. The times you poured your heart out to God, whispering through tears no one ever saw. Conversations that didn't make it to journals or pulpits, just sacred exchanges between your brokenness and His presence. And you've wondered in the stillness, did it count? Did heaven hear what the earth ignored? Yes, heaven heard and recorded it. Malachi 3:16 says, "A scroll of remembrance was written in His presence concerning those who feared the Lord and honored His name." Every unseen offering, every private cry, every silent choice to trust God even when the room was empty, none of it was wasted. It was counted. It was sacred. Have you ever thought about how many world changes began in silence? Before Pope Francis became one of the most recognized spiritual leaders of our time, he spent years cleaning floors and working as a janitor in Buenos Aires. A future pope, scrubbing toilets. Yet even then, he described it as a time when God was cleansing the pride from me. That hidden season didn't delay his calling, it qualified him for it. Or think of J.K. Rowling, who wrote her first Harry Potter manuscript in cafes while battling depression and raising a child alone. No one knew her name, but something was forming, something that would one day impact generations. She once said, "Rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life." Can you see how your invisible years might be the soil where unshakable purpose is planted? I once knew of a woman named Saria, a cafeteria worker who prayed quietly over every child she served for over 20 years. No one thanked her. She never told anyone. But one day, one of those children, now a respected physician, returned to honor her publicly, saying, "She was the first person to tell me I was chosen." What she did in private echoed into eternity. Even Jesus was unseen for 30 years. 3 decades of silence before 3 years of power. If the Son of God wasn't rushed into visibility, why should you fear the waiting? Could it be that your ache of invisibility wasn't abandonment, but formation? Could your obscurity have been your greatest protection? Pearls are not formed in noise, but in silence, inside the darkness of the shell, hidden from all light, wrapped around an irritation. Diamonds are not found on the surface, they're born in pressure. And seeds? They must break beneath the soil before anything can grow. The invisible years were not empty, they were the most holy space of all, where your roots reached deep while no one watched, so your fruit would last when everyone finally does. Think for a moment how diamonds are truly born, not in sunlight, not on open ground where the world watches, but in the deepest parts of the earth, where darkness reigns, where silence is unbroken, and where only heat, pressure, and time shape their beauty. No applause greets their creation. No one observes their transformation. Yet, when they rise, they carry a brilliance that needs no introduction. They don't offer explanations for the years spent hidden. They simply shine. Isn't that what God has been doing with you, chosen one? Beneath the surface, where no one else could see, where no validation was offered, something sacred was forming. And now, after all this time, you're not stepping out to prove anything. You're stepping forward because something inside has settled, a quiet, holy certainty. It's not the hunger for attention that moves you now. It's identity. It's clarity. You no longer walk into rooms trying to be seen. You walk in knowing heaven already saw you. Luke 17:21 says, "The kingdom of God is within you." That kingdom doesn't shout for attention. It moves with quiet authority. And that's the atmosphere you're carrying now. This is not the same version of you who once begged to be noticed. This is the version that understands. Applause can echo, but it cannot anchor. Visibility can come and go, but identity rooted in God never shakes. You've traded the chase for peace. You've traded performance for presence. I'll tell you about a man named Callan. Just 8 months ago, he was working night shifts in a warehouse, anonymously unloading boxes. No one cared who he was, but he spent those shifts listening to sermons, memorizing proverbs, fasting on his lunch breaks. Today, he stands on stages speaking to youth across the country, and when they ask how he got there, he just smiles. He never explains the pressure. He lets the fruit speak. And then there's the real-life story of Ingrid Betancourt, a former Colombian presidential candidate who was kidnapped and held captive for over 6 years in the jungle. In her memoir, she shares how those hidden, hellish years became the crucible where her soul was refined. Stripped of all status and recognition, she found her identity not in politics, but in prayer. She said, "It was in the silence that God showed me who I really was." That's the power of hidden pressure. It reveals the unshakable truth of who you are. Could it be that what you once saw as delay was actually the delivery room of your true strength? Could the silence have been your sanctuary, not your sentence? Consider nature again. The most powerful rivers don't make noise as they cut through mountains, they just carve. The most rooted trees don't shake when storms pass, they stand. That's you now, steady, settled, unshaken by who claps, who notices, or who doubts. Because when you know who sent you, you stop needing permission to arrive. You're not entering this next season hungry for approval. You're walking in already approved. The old you would have asked, will they accept me? But the new you knows, God already chose me. And that's why now, like the diamond rising from the depths, you don't need to speak loudly. You just need to shine. That kind of presence, the one forged in silence, baptized by hiddenness, and matured without applause, it doesn't need to announce itself. It enters quietly and still shifts the atmosphere. It calms the chaos in a room without saying a word. It strengthens your silence and purifies your speech. You don't have to raise your voice to carry authority anymore. You simply exist, and the room knows something holy just walked in. Have you noticed it lately? How people pause around you without knowing why? How your peace unsettles the proud and comforts the wounded? That's not by accident. That's what happens when God finishes crafting something He's hidden for a long time. Because He didn't hide you to punish you or to deprive you. He hid you to protect what was still in process. Isaiah 64:8 says, "Yet you, Lord, are our Father. We are the clay, you are the potter. We are all the work of your hand." And no artist ever rushes a masterpiece into public view before it's ready. Imagine someone pulling the veil off a sculpture while the clay is still wet. That would ruin the whole design. That's why God covered you. Not to limit you, but to let you become. Just like a gardener who waits for spring before unveiling the first fragile bloom. They know that frost will destroy what impatience exposes too soon. Could that be why God kept you hidden? Because the wrong season would have crushed what was still tender? Or like an architect digging deep into the earth, not to delay the building but to prepare it to rise higher? The deeper the foundation, the taller the structure, and you, chosen one, have been built for height, for weight, for impact. I once heard of a young woman named Amira. She spent years working in a quiet countryside church, folding bulletins and sweeping pews. No stage, no microphone, just devotion. She said God told her, "Be excellent when no one is watching." Years passed. One day, a visiting bishop heard her praying aloud in the empty sanctuary. 2 months later, she was invited to speak at a women's conference attended by thousands. No campaign, no ambition, just the unveiling of what God had covered. And then there's C.S. Lewis, the author and scholar known for the Chronicles of Narnia. Before he became a voice that awakened faith in millions, he endured long periods of obscurity, loss, and intellectual rejection. But he once wrote, "Hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny." Could your quiet season be the very preparation for something extraordinary? 1 Peter 5:6 declares, "Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, not when you beg for it, not when you try to force it, but in due time, a moment chosen by God himself." So now, when you walk into a room and people go quiet, that's not mystery, that's authority. That's what heaven-crafted presence looks like. Not loud, not boastful, but real, rooted, reverent. You're not rising to impress. You're not stepping forward to demand space. You're blooming because the sun is finally shining in the right season. What was unfolding in your silence wasn't just personal, it was sacred. Holy ground disguised as stillness, even when no one else could define it. Even when they whispered that you were too withdrawn, too quiet, too slow to rise. Even when it felt like others were being promoted while you remained in the shadows. What if what looked like being passed over was really you being set apart? You weren't overlooked. You were being overbuilt. God wasn't just preparing you. He was reinforcing you for weight your younger self could never have carried. Jeremiah 12:5 asks, "If you have raced with men on foot and they have worn you out, how can you compete with horses?" That verse isn't a rebuke, it's a revelation. What was forming in your silence was strength for a future that required more than charisma. It needed character. And character doesn't develop in noise. It forms in the quiet hours, in private battles, in the places where applause cannot reach. Have you ever felt like you were stuck while everyone else was sprinting forward? Could it be that you weren't stuck? You were being strengthened beneath the surface. Trees with the deepest roots take the longest to break ground. But when they do, they outlast every storm. There's a real-life story about Howard Schultz, the former CEO of Starbucks. Before he built a global coffee empire, he was raised in public housing and saw his father struggle with low-paying jobs. That pain planted a seed. Years later, he led Starbucks not just with ambition, but with empathy, offering healthcare to part-time employees and building a company culture around dignity. His silence as a boy watching his father's humiliation became the foundation for how he would lead millions. What has God been building in you beneath the pain? I'll tell you about someone named Ezra, a school teacher no one paid attention to. For years he stayed late, grading papers no one thanked him for, praying over every student's name. He lived alone, ate simply. But when one of his former students became a national leader, they called Ezra the most powerful person I ever met, because he taught me how to believe before I saw anything worth believing. No one knew what God was doing in Ezra's silence. But heaven was overbuilding him to hold the influence he didn't even know was coming. You, chosen one, were being shaped for something your past self could never have sustained. Can you imagine carrying today's mission with yesterday's mindset? That's why you couldn't be rushed. That's why God didn't expose you too soon. Even Jesus, the Son of God, didn't begin his public ministry until he was 30, though he had been the Messiah all along. Why wait? Because preparation in private preserves the integrity of what will be revealed in public. And that quiet strength you carry now, that gentle fire that doesn't need validation, that's not an accident. It's the evidence of what was born in silence. You weren't being delayed. You were being deepened. You weren't being ignored. You were being intensified. You weren't forgotten. You were fortified for a destiny far greater than the one you once begged for. And now the veil is thinning. You can feel it, can't you? That unfamiliar calm in your spirit, that sacred clarity that wasn't there before. It's subtle, but it's unmistakable. The fog is lifting. The weight is shifting. The doors that once seemed locked from the inside are creaking open, and you haven't even touched the handle. This is not coincidence. This is revelation. This is what happens when divine timing meets prepared identity. You've been walking through seasons where nothing made sense, until now. Suddenly, people who once overlooked you are curious. Opportunities that used to slam shut are now sliding open with ease. It's not because you changed your hustle. It's because heaven changed your hour. Isaiah 22:22 says, "When he opens a door, no one can shut it, and when he shuts it, no one can open it." Could it be that those locked doors weren't rejections, but delays synchronized with heaven's schedule, and you're not entering this next chapter with fanfare or flashing lights? There's no crowd waiting to cheer. But there is something better: precision. You're being revealed the way a sunrise reveals a mountain range, quietly, yet undeniably. You don't need noise to validate this moment. You've become the kind of presence that moves in silence and still shifts the atmosphere. Because silence isn't stillness, it's depth, and depth makes sound only heaven can hear. Have you noticed how God often works without spectacle? When Jesus rose from the dead, there was no trumpet blast. No crowd watched the stone roll away. Heaven's greatest victories often begin in silence. That's the same pattern in your life. You weren't launched like a firework. You were planted like a seed, quietly, purposefully. But now the soil is breaking, the light is reaching, and what's been hidden is about to rise. Think of how the moon controls tides without a single sound, or how roots beneath a tree can split concrete, slowly, silently, powerfully. That's what your growth has looked like. Not rushed, but unstoppable. I once met a man named Theo. He worked in tech support for years. No promotions, no accolades. But each night he studied data, took online theology classes, and interceded for his co-workers by name. He never posted about it. He never pushed himself forward. But one day, his company's founder noticed his wisdom and asked him to help restructure the entire leadership culture. Now, Theo travels the world teaching businesses how to blend excellence with integrity. He says, "God didn't promote me, He revealed me." Even Mother Teresa, who became a global symbol of compassion, spent decades in quiet service before the world even knew her name. Her impact didn't begin when the cameras arrived. It began in Kolkata's slums, with silence, prayer, and presence. She once said, "God speaks in the silence of the heart." And that's what He's doing with you now. Not broadcasting, not performing, revealing. The veil is thinning. Heaven is drawing back the curtain, not for drama, but for destiny. Because now you're not being driven by the need to be seen. You're being drawn by the one who sees it all. And when He reveals what He's been building in you, no power in hell and no voice on earth will be able to deny it. This is not a spotlight. This is a holy unveiling. The truth is, not everyone was meant to witness your building season. Not everyone deserved to see the construction site of your calling. Some people didn't have the spiritual vocabulary to even recognize what you were carrying. They would have misunderstood it, misnamed it, or tried to minimize it. That's why the isolation had to be divine. It wasn't rejection, it was redirection. It was God saying, "This part is too sacred for public viewing." Luke 1:24 tells us that when Elizabeth conceived John the Baptist, she hid herself for 5 months, not because of shame, but because what was forming in her couldn't be tampered with by external noise. Do you see now? The isolation was God's idea, so that no one could mislabel your pain, so that no one could hijack your testimony, so that when you rise, there would be no confusion about who gets the credit. Because this version of you wasn't built by applause, it was built by obedience. It wasn't people's likes that shaped you. It was those private moments when you showed up in the dark, when you worshipped with no music playing, when you prayed without answers, when you stayed faithful, even when God felt silent. Hebrews 11:1 declares, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." And that's exactly how you've been living. Walking without sight, loving without guarantees, trusting when the silence felt endless. I once knew a man named Julian. He used to sit alone in the back row of a small town church, rarely speaking, always serving. No one knew he had been fasting every Tuesday for 7 years, praying for revival in that town. One day, a spontaneous worship night broke out, and over 300 people came to Christ. The pastor wept, but Julian just smiled. He never tried to take credit. He said, "I didn't build this for credit. I built it for God." And heaven knew. And consider the story of Harriet Tubman, the brave woman who led enslaved people to freedom. She had no platform, no titles, no army, but she had conviction. She once said, "I always told God, I'm going to hold steady on you, and you've got to see me through." Her strength didn't come from being recognized. It came from trusting God even when the night was long and the path was unknown. What about you? Could it be that the loneliest chapters of your life were actually the most important? Could it be that God hid you, not to punish you, but to purify you? Like how the eagle builds its nest high in the mountains where no predator can reach its young, God placed you where others couldn't contaminate the process. You were kept away, not cast aside. And that's why when you step into this next season, it won't be with pride. It will be with depth. Because you know how much it costs to become this version of you. You weren't built in the spotlight. You were built in the shadows. Not with crowds cheering you on, but with tears nobody saw. Not with constant confirmation, but with stubborn faith. Not with comfort, but with raw, untamed obedience. And when the time comes, and it's close now, they'll see what God shaped in the dark, and they'll marvel, but they won't be able to take the credit, because only heaven knows what it cost, and only heaven gets the glory. That kind of development, the kind that transforms you from the inside out, doesn't arrive with flashing lights or loud announcements. It doesn't come from climbing stages or collecting recognition. It comes through the quiet work of becoming. It happens as you walk past the very places that once confused you, realizing you're no longer looking for their approval or their answers or even their understanding. Have you noticed that lately? That your spirit no longer reaches for noise like it once did? That the craving for validation has been replaced with a craving for peace, not just comfort, but real, holy, heaven-approved peace. The kind that sometimes costs you friends, the kind that sometimes gets you labeled as distant, withdrawn, or different. But you've learned something sacred. Being hidden by God is always better than being seen by people who were never meant to witness your becoming. Psalm 91:1 says, "Whoever dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." That shadow, God's covering, is not a place of punishment. It's a fortress, a sanctuary. It's where kings are formed before they are crowned. And now that it's time to be revealed, You're not stepping out with shaky hands and desperate eyes. You're not looking around to see who's watching. You're not asking, will they accept me? Instead, something in you already knows. You've been accepted, affirmed, and appointed by God Himself. This isn't your entrance. This is your emergence. You're walking forward, not because the world finally opened its doors, but because heaven whispered, now. You're steady, rooted, crowned not with gold but with clarity, not with titles but with truth. And that's what makes this moment so different. It's not about being discovered, it's about being deployed. Esther 4:14 says, perhaps you were born for such a time as this, not to be seen, but to be sent, not to be celebrated, but to carry a divine assignment that no one else can fulfill. I once knew a woman named Leora. For years, she worked behind the scenes managing supplies for a rural mission in India. No one knew her name. She didn't preach. She didn't post. But one day, when the mission leader suddenly fell ill, she stepped in to lead, and revival broke out across 4 villages. When asked how she handled the pressure, she said, I wasn't promoted, I was prepared. That's the difference between people who perform and people who are positioned. One seeks attention, the other carries authority. Even Fred Rogers, the beloved creator of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, wasn't flashy or loud. He changed generations with stillness, compassion, and quiet strength. He once said, it's not so much what we have in this life that matters. It's what we do with what we have. His presence was gentle, but his purpose was weighty. What about you? Could it be that all the years you spent misunderstood, overlooked, and hidden were actually years of deployment preparation? Like a seed buried deep, you weren't forgotten. You were being formed. Like an arrow in the hands of a skilled archer, you were being pulled back, not to be dismissed, but to be launched with precision. And now the tension breaks, the silence lifts, and God is sending you, not for attention but for impact. This isn't about being seen anymore. It's about stepping into what you were secretly built for all along. You've learned this now, deep in your bones. When something truly precious is forming, it stays hidden. When oil is being pressed, when gold is being refined, when purpose is being sealed, it happens out of sight, out of reach, out of noise. And you, God's chosen one, have come to understand that not all obscurity is punishment. Some of it is protection. But let's be honest, that hidden season, it wasn't poetic, it wasn't glowing with confidence or wrapped in peaceful certainty. Most days it didn't feel like formation, it felt like frustration. It felt like being in a hallway full of open doors. And yet, somehow, none of them opened when you walked toward them. And the silence you were handed, let's not pretend it was gentle. It wasn't the comforting kind that lets you rest. It was the kind that echoed, the kind that left you asking, God, are you even still in the room? You've had nights where your chest felt tight for no reason, days where your soul felt tired even after a full night's sleep, mornings where your hands lifted in worship even while your heart whispered, I don't understand. And the question wasn't always, am I chosen? It was, why does being chosen feel so heavy? Psalm 13:1 echoes that ache. How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? That's the raw honesty of David, a man after God's own heart. Even he had moments of sacred exhaustion. And maybe that's why your journey has been so quiet, because it was never about ease, it was about endurance, the kind that forms in the dark, the kind that no applause can give you and no enemy can take from you. I once heard of a woman named Serafina. She was a gifted singer, but every door in the music world closed on her. For 5 years she worked nights as a caregiver, singing hymns to the elderly in silence. One day, one of those patients recorded her and uploaded it online. That video went viral. But when asked how she felt, she said, This was never about being discovered. It was about staying faithful in the silence. And even Martin Luther King Jr., a name now honored around the world, once confessed in his journals that he felt overwhelmed and unseen during the early days of the movement. He wrote, "There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over." And yet he endured, not because it felt easy, but because calling doesn't come wrapped in comfort. What if what made you tired wasn't the calling, but carrying it before it was time? What if your soul wasn't broken, but stretching? What if the locked doors weren't rejection, but redirection to protect what you weren't ready to carry yet? Like a mother bird sitting on her eggs in stillness, motionless, vulnerable, patient. She doesn't move because life is forming under the surface. And like her, you remained, not because you were stuck, but because something holy was incubating in your silence. Romans 8:18 gives us this hope. "I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us." Even the weight you've carried has purpose. Even the ache has assignment. And now, as the light begins to rise on your story, you don't walk out naive. You walk out with a knowing. You were hidden, not because you were weak, but because you were sacred. And here's the part no one talks about, the part that never makes it into sermons or highlight reels. Sometimes the spiritual weight didn't feel sacred. It didn't feel anointed. It didn't feel holy. It felt like being forgotten, like being stuck in a life that no longer fit, but still couldn't be left behind. You watched people move ahead while you stayed planted. You saw others celebrated for talents you've quietly carried in secret for years. Doors flew open for them while you stayed waiting, wondering, praying in silence. And it hurt. Not because you were jealous, but because deep down you wondered, did heaven forget my name? That kind of ache is real. Even Joseph, favored and gifted with divine dreams, sat in a prison while others rose in Pharaoh's court. And Genesis 40:23 records this painful truth. The chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. But God didn't forget, and neither has he forgotten you. Even with the weight of invisibility pressing on your chest, you still showed up. Not because it always made sense, but because something unshakable in you refused to let go. There were days your prayers sounded more like sighs. Moments when your spirit whispered, "I'm still here," even when your strength was gone. That wasn't weakness. That was obedience. And that season, that was the real formation. The part of your story that won't be flashy, but will be foundational. The chapter that taught you how to walk by faith, not by sight. The stretch where your soul stopped needing validation from people who never had the power to define you in the first place. You didn't just survive silence. You started becoming someone within it. Your spirit learned how to hold tension without breaking, how to be soft and strong at the same time, how to live with questions, yet still worship like you had answers. I once met a man named Malik, a gifted writer, unseen for decades. He self-published his work, sold only 10 copies the first year, but he kept writing, not for fame, but because the words wouldn't leave him alone. Years later, one of his poems was discovered and turned into the script of an award-winning film. When asked why he kept going, he said, "I didn't write for recognition. I wrote to stay alive." And that's you too, isn't it? You didn't keep showing up because someone clapped for you. You did it because heaven was watching and your spirit wouldn't let you stop. Galatians 6:9 promises, "Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." And what you've been sowing in the silence will not stay buried forever. It was never for applause. It was for alignment. Like mountains that grow silently over time, like glaciers moving powerfully beneath still waters, your transformation wasn't loud, but it was unstoppable. You stopped living for the spotlight. You started living from the source, and your identity, it's no longer tethered to being seen. It's rooted in being real, real with God, real with yourself, real with the assignment you've been entrusted with. And that, chosen one, is what made you unshakable. And now something is shifting, not just in your thoughts, but in your entire atmosphere. You can feel it. It's subtle, but it's sure. The ground beneath your life has started to move, and it's not random. It's prophetic. Little things are beginning to unfold, and yet they don't feel small. People speak to you differently. Their tone carries reverence, even if they don't know why. Their questions go deeper, as if they sense you've walked through something they can't name, and you're no longer shrinking to stay comfortable. You enter a room and suddenly become aware. The energy in the space has already adjusted itself to your presence. Could it be that heaven has gone ahead of you? That the Spirit of God is now preparing places for you before you even arrive? Deuteronomy 31:8 says, "The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." What you're sensing is not imagination, it's alignment. The veil between what is and what will be has started to thin. And you're walking in divine timing now, not human striving. You once had to fight to be heard. Now people pause to listen without you asking. You once tried to convince rooms to let you in. Now they feel different the moment you step through the door. I once met a woman named Tala, a mid-level consultant for a company who no one paid much attention to. But after years of private intercession in her office, fasting in silence, and refusing to cut corners, something shifted. People began to ask her for advice that had nothing to do with business. They said her presence settled the chaos. She wasn't promoted by policy. She was elevated by atmosphere. Even Nelson Mandela, during his years of imprisonment, underwent a transformation so deep that when he was released, even his enemies described him as a man who carried peace in his silence. His authority didn't begin when he took office. It began when his soul grew strong in secret. What if the weight you carry now isn't pride? It's presence. Can you feel it? Not the applause, not the spotlight, but the shift. You're no longer chasing alignment, it's chasing you. Like a river carving a path through the earth, your obedience has made room for flow. Like gravity, invisible but undeniable, the atmosphere around you bends before your assignment. Isaiah 61 declares, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." And now, chosen one, the glow that once felt hidden is starting to rise. You didn't demand this. You were prepared for it. So when you notice that rooms feel different now, when people start looking to you for depth, when they linger around your silence, it's not ego, it's evidence. God is making visible what he once kept private. And you're walking in it, not as someone who needs to be recognized, but as someone who knows they've already been anointed. That tug you've been feeling, that sudden clarity in your spirit, that's not your imagination. It's divine alignment breaking through the surface like morning light through clouds. It's the shift that happens when your soul stops pretending. You're not chasing attention. You're no longer trying to be magnetic. You simply are, because you've finally become honest with yourself, with God, and with the assignment resting on your life. And here's the powerful mystery. True spiritual honesty carries its own vibration. It speaks before you do. It draws before you even arrive. Have you noticed how rooms feel different when you enter now? That's not pride, it's presence. The kind of presence that only heaven can produce. As Jesus said in Matthew 5:14, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden." You're no longer forcing favor like you once did. You're not hustling for validation. You're simply recognizing what was always yours. What changed? Not your worth, but your awareness. And that shift in awareness is powerful. It's what turns survival into revelation and struggle into strategy. Think of Esther. She didn't ask to be queen. She wasn't born into royalty. But when the moment arrived, she recognized that favor had found her, not because she chased it, but because she was aligned with it. And who knows, Mordecai told her in Esther 4:14, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Could it be that your favor is now unlocking because your honesty has finally caught up with your calling? Let me tell you about Jalen, a quiet teacher in a forgotten rural town. For years he felt unseen, until one day he shared a short message of encouragement to his small class, and one student posted it online. That message reached over 1 million people. He didn't rehearse it. He didn't brand it. He just spoke from a place of truth. That's what happens when the story becomes strong enough to walk without needing a resume. There's a truth you're finally strong enough to carry without apology. It wasn't just that God was hiding you. It was that He was protecting the narrative, the sacred, complex, anointed narrative of your becoming. He wasn't silencing you to suppress your worth. He was building your story until it could walk into rooms without needing to be explained. Just like Jesus often told those He healed, tell no one, not because He feared exposure, but because timing mattered. Revelation without preparation leads to misunderstanding. Have you ever felt the weight of trying to explain what God was doing in you, only to be met with blank stares? That's because the story wasn't ready, but now it is. Imagine a pearl forming deep in the ocean, no sound, no audience, just pressure, time, and grace. And when it's ready, it doesn't explain itself. It simply emerges, undeniably rare. That's what's happening in you. You've crossed a threshold. What once needed hiding now stands in strength. The frequency has changed. The silence is ending. And the story, it no longer needs a microphone. It just needs a moment. That story the world is starting to recognize. It's you now. Not the broken version, not just the survivor, but the one who has learned to walk with scars that no longer bleed. The healed parts of you still remember the pain, but they don't live in it anymore. Isn't that the sign of true transformation? When the memory no longer controls the moment. The calm you carry, it's not fake. It's been fought for. Just like Jacob in Genesis 32, you wrestled in the dark, alone, not knowing if dawn would ever come. And now you wear that quiet peace like armor. You've become steady in rooms full of scattered noise, composed where confusion reigns. You don't speak to control the energy. You simply are, and the room adjusts around your presence. Isn't that what grace looks like when it matures? And now, it's beginning to show. People who once overlooked you are suddenly paying attention. Not because you've changed how you look, but because you've changed what you carry. There's weight in your silence, the kind of stillness that makes people uncomfortable, not because you're trying to be mysterious, but because you finally stopped needing to explain yourself just to feel seen. That's the true glow-up, not in how many followers you have, not in the applause, but in your freedom from needing any of it. You no longer need visibility to feel valid. You've detached from the illusion that worth must be witnessed. Even Jesus, after healing the sick and raising the dead, often withdrew. Mark 1:35 says, "Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place, where he prayed." Why would the Son of God withdraw after miracles? Because spiritual power isn't sustained by public praise. It's fueled in private presence. I'll tell you about Grace, a quiet barista who used to stutter so badly she was terrified to speak during rush hour. But one day, she began leaving little handwritten verses on coffee sleeves, never signed. Within months, customers would line up just for a note. She never announced it. She just showed up with presence. Today, her coffee shop is known as the healing stop in her city. Even nature teaches this. Think of the moon. It doesn't speak, it doesn't strive, but it pulls oceans, shifts tides, and lights up the night just by being. That's the level you're stepping into, quiet strength, unapologetic radiance. And here's a real-world echo of that. Keanu Reeves, the renowned actor, is known not only for his roles, but for his profound humility and deep inner peace. Despite global fame, he often rides public transit, gives generously without publicizing it, and walks through life with detachment from validation. In an interview, he once said, "I don't want to be part of a world where being kind is a weakness." His calm is contagious because it's real. It wasn't performed. It was earned. That's you now. You're not trying to be magnetic. You're just finally aligned with who you are. You stopped needing applause, and suddenly you command rooms without saying a word. You're not chasing favor anymore. You're moving in it. Because the real glow-up was never about being seen. It was about no longer needing to be. There was a time when you constantly asked, "When will someone finally see what I carry?" You doubted whether anyone truly noticed the weight you bore, the light you protected, the fire you tended when no one was watching. But that question doesn't torment you anymore, does it? Because now you've come to understand something sacred. The right ones already see it. The ones sent by God, the ones with eyes tuned to heaven's frequency. And as for the rest, they'll feel it soon enough. Because when God makes something undeniable, it doesn't announce itself. It radiates. Isaiah 61 declares, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." That kind of light doesn't need a spotlight. It is the spotlight. It doesn't beg for attention. It becomes attention. Not through noise or flash, but through undeniable resonance. Can presence be more powerful than performance? That's what your life is doing now. You're not just being noticed, you're being felt. People walk past you and sense something they can't articulate. A weight in the air, a quiet strength, a peace that unsettles the chaos around it. Why? Because you've become a vessel for something eternal. You're no longer trying to prove your worth with captions or compliments. Your existence alone is speaking volumes. I once met someone named Alton, a security guard at a corporate building who barely said a word. Yet, executives and interns alike stopped to greet him every morning, not because of his uniform, but because of his energy. He remembered names. He prayed quietly behind the reception desk, and people said they felt lighter after speaking with him. He never preached, but he carried presence, a silent revival in a blue shirt. Think of a mountain at sunrise. It doesn't move. It doesn't speak. And yet, no one can ignore it. That's you now. A steady wonder, something so grounded in God's design that it silences every attempt to overlook it. Could it be that your very stillness is declaring what words never could? Even Pope John Paul II, one of the most beloved spiritual leaders in modern history, was known not only for his words, but for the depth of his silence. During a youth gathering, someone once said that when he entered the room, it felt like time bowed. Not because he tried to be powerful, but because his intimacy with God had become part of his atmosphere. You've stepped into that same kind of quiet authority. You're no longer auditioning for recognition, you're standing in revelation. The version of you now doesn't need applause to feel anointed, and the world is beginning to sense it, slowly, undeniably, irresistibly, because what God seals cannot be silenced. Yes, some people will be confused. They'll stare, tilt their heads, and ask questions they'll never say aloud. When did you change? What happened to you? How did you get here? But while they try to piece it together, you'll already know the truth. You didn't just show up here out of nowhere. You weren't dropped into destiny. You were refined by fire. But 1 Peter 1:7 says, "These trials will show that your faith is genuine, purified as gold that is refined by fire." That's what happened to you. You were crushed, not for defeat, but for clarity. Your wilderness didn't break you. It stripped everything that wasn't real. Every silent night, every battle behind closed doors, every moment you felt forgotten was shaping something unshakable in you. So now you're no longer afraid of the good things coming. You're not shrinking to fit in or walking on eggshells, hoping the blessing won't vanish overnight, because you know what it cost. You remember what it healed. And most of all, you know who made it happen. You've stepped into success, not as a stranger to the struggle, but as someone who stared failure in the face and kept walking. You wear your peace like armor now. Your joy has roots. Could it be that this time your elevation doesn't feel heavy, because it's finally built on something holy? Think of Joseph. When his brothers saw him again, robed in royalty, holding authority, they didn't recognize the boy they once betrayed. But Joseph didn't rise overnight. He was misunderstood, falsely accused, and forgotten in a prison cell. Yet when the moment came, he said in Genesis 50:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." That's not the voice of someone who got lucky. That's the voice of someone who got refined. Let me tell you about Nadine, an introverted textile designer who used to sell handmade scarves at flea markets. People passed her booth dozens of times without stopping, but she kept showing up, kept praying, kept weaving. Today, one of her designs was featured in a global fashion magazine. When asked what changed, she simply said, "Nothing. I just stopped apologizing for being ready." The world didn't suddenly reward her. It finally caught up with her refinement. Even in the natural world, a pearl isn't born overnight. It's formed in irritation, in pressure, in silence. And when it's revealed, no one asks about the years it spent hidden in darkness. But you know, that's what sets you apart now. You remember the refining. And as for the people who don't understand, that's okay. You're not here for applause. You're here on assignment. And like C.S. Lewis, the author and theologian, once said, "Hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny." You didn't just arrive, you were prepared. And now that you're here, you walk with a reverence for what it took to make it this far. So no, this isn't your peak, not even close. What you're experiencing right now is merely the first clear echo of what's been planted in deep, holy silence for years. It's the sound of long-forgotten prayers finally breaking the surface. It's the fruit of obedience sown in tears, now ripening under the light of divine timing. Galatians 6:9 reminds us, "Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." That proper time? It's beginning to whisper your name. This isn't the finish line, it's the opening gate. Can you feel the ground shifting beneath your feet, not in chaos, but in calling? What once simply grew in hidden soil is now rising, without apology, without performance, without the need for validation. You're not rushing it this time. You've learned the rhythm of the Spirit, the slow unfolding of divine things. What God is doing through you now doesn't need to be forced. Like the tide returning to the shore, it just knows when to come. And through it all, there's a quiet proof written in your life that not a single season of silence was wasted. Every delay had direction. Every disappointment held design. Every not yet was heaven's way of saying, "Let me finish writing this chapter before the world reads it." I once heard about a man named Elias who spent a decade building violins by hand in his garage. He never posted online, never advertised, but he prayed over every instrument. One day, a touring symphony discovered his work, and now world-class musicians travel just to hold one of his violins. When asked why he never marketed himself, he smiled and said, "God knew where I was." That was enough. Even the earth understands timing. Think of the bamboo tree. For years after it's planted, nothing appears above ground, but beneath the surface it's building roots that can support its towering future. Then, in just a few weeks, it skyrockets, growing feet each day. But the growth didn't start when it appeared. It started the day it was planted. That's your life right now. You weren't late. You were protected, sheltered beneath the shadow of the Almighty, while He nurtured what no eye could see. And now it's time, not because you shouted for attention, but because your story is finally ready to be seen. And as the curtain lifts, there are no fireworks, no frantic explanations, just you, rising. As Psalm 92:12 declares, "The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon, strong, rooted, visible only when heaven says so." You're not just rising, you're emerging, and with it, everything that was once hidden in you is stepping into light. But this unveiling isn't noisy. It's sacred, quiet like dawn, but powerful like thunder buried in the sky. There's no need for announcement. Your becoming is the announcement. For years, you were the answer wrapped in silence, the gift no one knew they needed. God hid you not to withhold you, but to preserve the integrity of your calling. Like Mary, who carried the Savior in secrecy while the world went about its routine, you were holding something holy in an ordinary season. What would have happened if that calling was exposed before it was formed? Ecclesiastes 3:11 reminds us, "He has made everything beautiful in its time, not before, not when it was convenient, but in its appointed time." You weren't late, you were hidden on purpose. Some will think you came out of nowhere, but those who truly see in the Spirit will know. You've been carrying this for a long time, like an old tree whose roots dig deeper than its trunk reveals. Your stability is not in your surface. It's in the years no one saw, the nights you didn't give up, the prayers that never made it into posts, the tears you dried alone. Let me tell you about Simone, a former foster child who lived in over 15 homes before she turned 18. No one knew that by night she wrote letters to God in the margins of old newspapers. Today, she leads a non-profit that helps displaced children find permanent homes. But when asked how she built her foundation, she said, "It was built in basements before I had a nameplate on a door." Have you noticed it lately? You're walking into rooms now, not just as a participant, but as a presence. The atmosphere bends when you arrive, not because you've changed your outfit, but because your soul carries weight. Heaven's fingerprint is on you. What was once internal has begun to speak externally, without even needing words. Even nature reflects this. The sun doesn't rush to rise. It slowly ascends, and yet by the time it fully emerges, no one can deny its arrival. Could that be your life right now? Quiet beginnings, but undeniable illumination. And with this emergence comes a sacred responsibility, not to prove anything, but to remain rooted in the one who formed you in the dark. Because when God reveals what He refined, it's not for performance, it's for purpose. As Isaiah 60:22 declares, "When the time is right, I, the Lord, will make it happen." You don't need to push what's already been promised. You don't need to defend what heaven has decided. All you have to do is keep showing up, carrying the weight of what you've survived. Not as a burden, but as a banner. They'll ask how you got here. They'll want to know your secret. And the truth is, it was never a strategy. It was surrender. God didn't just rescue you, He rebuilt you. And now you're walking evidence that hidden seasons are not wasted seasons. Now that the curtain is lifting and eyes are beginning to notice, here's the truth. This visibility is not your prize. It's your post. You're not here to bask in applause. You're here to carry the assignment into the light. Public elevation for God's chosen ones is never a reward. It's a responsibility. You've been entrusted with visibility, not to impress, but to illuminate. Not to say, "Look at me," but to reflect the one who carried you through the darkest hours without a stage or spotlight. That's why the stage is heavier now. Can you feel it? That weight in your chest as you're being seen. It's not fear, it's holy reverence, because you know this isn't just about you. Luke 12:48 echoes loudly here. To whom much is given, much will be required. And now that the light is on you, you're not just seen, you're studied. How you move, how you respond, how you love, these things are being watched by those wondering if God is real. Could it be that your life has become someone else's confirmation that heaven speaks in human form? I remember a man named Khalid, once a gang member in his early 20s. He disappeared from the streets for almost a year. When he returned, he was different. He didn't preach. He didn't argue. He just carried peace. The same people who once fought beside him now pull him aside to ask how he broke free. He simply says, God didn't just get me out. He sat with me in it until I stopped wanting to bleed. That's what you're carrying now. Evidence. You are a walking answer to someone else's silent question. Not because you're perfect, but because you've been purified. The wilderness taught you how to listen before speaking, how to stand still before being sent, how to stay soft in a world that hardens quickly. And make no mistake, this is not a platform for ego. This is a platform for intercession. You've been brought into visibility because others are watching, some with hope, others with doubt, all of them waiting to see if your light flickers or holds. Even creation teaches this. Consider a lighthouse. Its job isn't to draw attention to itself, but to guide ships safely through darkness. That's you now. Lit for a reason, placed where storms hit hardest, positioned not to be praised but to be present. And as you walk in this responsibility, don't be surprised when it feels lonely again. The crowd that cheered may grow silent when you speak truth. Some who celebrated your emergence may feel threatened by your confidence, but you've already passed that test. You no longer shape yourself for comfort. You were shaped for calling. John 3:30 becomes your anthem. He must increase and I must decrease. You know now that your life isn't about brand. It's about bearing witness. So when people ask what changed, why you're not hustling, why you're not defending yourself anymore, why you're not auditioning for rooms you used to beg to be in, let your silence be the sermon. Let your endurance be the message. Because this isn't about popularity. It's about purpose finally standing in the open. You're not afraid of being seen now because you know who sent you. And he doesn't send unprepared vessels. He sends the ones he refined in fire. You know what it feels like to be overlooked. To be the one they left out of the room, the plan, the prophecy. You've tasted the bitterness of being misunderstood, misread, and misjudged. There were moments you sat in silence while others were celebrated. Moments when your ideas were ignored until someone else repeated them louder. But now the calling that once whispered has become undeniable, and you're no longer waiting for permission. You're leading. But here's what makes you different. You're not leading from ego, you're leading from healing. And that changes everything. Because you've been abandoned before, you lead with compassion. Because you've been underestimated, you recognize the overlooked. Because you've been silent for years, you now speak only when it matters. And when you do, heaven backs your voice. Can you feel it? That deep steadiness in your chest. It's not pride, it's preparation revealed. Isaiah 41, 9-10 says, I have chosen you and have not rejected you. So do not fear, for I am with you. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. You're not stepping into leadership hoping to be accepted. You've already survived rejection, and that gave you a resilience titles could never teach. What they meant for isolation, God used for instruction. Think of Joseph again, sold by his brothers, forgotten in a pit, lied on in a palace, left in a prison. And yet, when famine hit, the same brothers who betrayed him came bowing to him, needing the wisdom they once rejected. Genesis 50:20 wasn't just a declaration, it was a shift in authority. Joseph didn't just have food, he had clarity. And that's you now. You're not just rising, you're reigning, quietly, wisely, and with a memory of where you came from. Let me tell you about a man named Chike, who spent 7 years applying for jobs in his field, always told he wasn't quite the fit. So he started serving at a small local charity instead, managing supplies, delivering food, and praying silently over names on donation cards. One day, an international philanthropist visited unannounced, noticed his strategic thinking, and offered him a role overseeing aid distribution across multiple nations. The people who once told him no now request his insight. What changed? He didn't become more worthy. He became more visible to the right eyes. God's timing finally opened the door. And consider Howard Schultz, the former CEO of Starbucks. Raised in public housing and rejected repeatedly before launching his vision, he once said, "When you're surrounded by people who believe in you and challenge you to grow, you learn not to give up, even when you're the only one who sees the vision." His leadership wasn't born in boardrooms, it was born in hardship. Even nature confirms this. The eagle doesn't build nests in the valley, it builds them on cliffs, where wind is fierce and access is limited. Why? Because the ones who are meant to soar above are not raised where it's comfortable. They're raised where only the strong survive. So now, when they ask you to lead, you don't shrink, you don't over-explain, you don't question whether you're ready, because you remember what it cost to become this steady. You remember who left, who laughed, who forgot you. But more than that, you remember who stayed. God. In every dark place, in every season no one clapped. He was refining your voice, not for fame, but for function. You're not leading for attention. You're leading because you've become the answer to a problem you once cried over. And this time you walk in full awareness that you were never meant to fit in, because you were always meant to stand apart. So now you know. You weren't hidden to be silenced. You were hidden to be strengthened. Every invisible battle, every overlooked moment, every time you wondered if heaven had forgotten your name, was all part of the architecture of your becoming. God was not punishing you. He was protecting the prophecy inside you until it was strong enough to walk without fear and rise without apology. And now the hiding is over. This is your emergence, not as someone seeking approval, but as someone who's been approved in private. Walk boldly, lead humbly, and never forget, what you carry didn't come cheap, so treat it like the treasure it is. If this word confirmed something in your spirit today, let it echo by sharing it with someone else who's still waiting in the dark. Drop a 777 in the comments if you know this season is yours. If you feel called to support this message through a super thanks, we receive it with gratitude. But if you don't, we thank you just as deeply for simply watching, listening, and walking with us in truth. Your presence here is never taken for granted. May the God who sees in secret reward you openly. May your steps be firm, your voice be clear, your mission unshakable. And may every room you walk into feel heaven drawing near, because you showed up. Blessings to you, chosen one. Your time is now. Keep rising.